Because of the state of the world and how bad things happen to good people, and how there's so much not only unnecessary suffering, but suffering for people who may not have even done anything, who may be too young to understand the suffering, I have often criticized Christian doctrine and the idea of an all-knowing, all-loving God watching us. Because if this God really did care about humanity as Christians says that this God does, then he either does not know about the suffering that we go through, which I find unlikely since this God is supposedly omnipotent, or he doesn't care, which I think is the more likely answer. Christians can't accept this, so they ask me, okay, what about you? How can you do a better job of running the world than God? What would you do to make the world a better place and to get rid of all the unnecessary suffering that is supposedly present in the world? After all, the suffering that God lets us go through are trials of sort to help us with life. The basic contention is this. Atheists often complain that God is an unruly, unjust, evil murderer and causes a lot of unnecessary suffering in the world. Well, let's see you do any better, because apparently every time a human being suffers, it's a lesson learned. And if you think you can run it any better, then go right ahead, but I don't think you can. My answer to that, as arrogant as it sounds, is try me. Assuming I had all the power in the world, all the knowledge to use that power, and I could be at any place at any time, there are a lot of ways I can make the world a better place. The first thing, before I talk about disease and pestilence and unnecessary suffering and whatnot, is that I would not give a damn if anyone decided not to recognize me or worship me, or if they decide to worship someone else or something else. If they even decide to speak against me, I don't care, because I would want to help people regardless, out of the kindness of my own heart and out of the empathy I feel for human suffering. And to be honest, I think that's more than I can say for any God that has ever existed. Take, for instance, how a normal, caring person who helps out other people would go to hell and burn in a lake of fire for all eternity because he did not believe in a particular God. Or maybe he didn't believe in a God at all. On the other hand, a supposed true believer who may have committed a whole list of unspeakable atrocities can only repent at the last second and acknowledge that this God exists and acknowledge this God's supposed sacrifice, and then somehow magically gain passage into eternal, everlasting happiness, which I think is reprehensible, to say the least. Secondly, I'd like to point out that for a God that supposedly cares a lot about human beings and is very concerned with this evil nature of the creature he created, he seems to be rather inefficient in trying to solve the problems that he himself should have known about. I mean, for crying out loud, massacring entire nations just to appease one particular side, sending a global flood to wipe out all of humanity, save one family of people, and pretty much a whole list of other things that God decides to do. You'd think we'd have some more diplomatic solutions than to just wipe out everyone that doesn't agree with you, right? As far as I can tell, there are two ways you can go about answering my previous claim. You can use the free will defense, which has been used ad nauseum, to which I'd say, well, where was the free will of the 20 million or so people that God drowned in the global flood? Where were the free will of the citizens of Egypt when they had all those plagues brought down upon them for the sins of one man? Where was the free will of murder victims when the murderers essentially took their lives and God just sat there? Where was their free will? On the other hand, you could say, well, all of those 20 million people were all evil and destined to destroy the world or something. And, of course, even if you could prove that to be true, my question is, playing God, once again, as an omnipotent being, how would I not know that these people that I supposedly created would grow up to be evil incarnations and destroy the world that I so lovingly created? How would I not know that before creating them if I was supposedly omniscient? There's just no excuse. Thirdly, this whole idea of teaching a lesson through pain or through suffering. As I pointed out before, it's not just unnecessary suffering, but disproportionate suffering. Like, if you want to go make murderers suffer, or like serial rapists suffer, while I don't necessarily agree with that view sometimes, I can kind of see where you're coming from. But when you're going to let children by the thousands die of starvation, and some just even die just from childbirth, then I really don't see the point. Besides, if I had a lesson to teach people, like show compassion towards your fellow men and women and children, violence is bad and does not really solve anyone's problems, or if I had some sort of lesson like that, I can go and tell them myself. I don't need to put people through unnecessary suffering in order to teach them a lesson if I am perfectly capable of walking down and telling them. Finally, if I were to write a book or something, or like some scriptures to teach what I think would make the world a better place, I would make it crystal clear what I wanted, and I would have it like documented by everyone in academia. So there is no excuse for any misinterpretations or taking something out of context or people looking at something the wrong way. It would be crystal clear what I wanted and crystal clear what I thought was necessary. Which is more than I can say for the Bible or any other holy book, I'm afraid. And before you answer with something along the lines of, who are you to question God on what he does? How you know? You're just a flawed human being, whereas he's an omnipotent, omniscient God. Well, here's my answer. Yeah, that's right, I'm a human being. I'm a human being that has empathy towards other human beings. I am a human being that happens to care about the welfare of other people. And I think, like every natural human being, if they saw a person who decided to enact a moral system similar to the one your God used, I would stand against that. And not out of ego, not out of arrogance, but out of empathy for other human beings. Out of not wanting to see people suffer, as God apparently does not seem to care. And if you're going to appeal to authority here and say, well, God is the ultimate source of knowledge, and he's the ultimate spiritual being, and who are you to question what God knows that you don't know? Let me ask you this. How much more convincing do you think that would sound if Hitler said the exact same thing to you? How convincing do you think it would be if Mao or Pol Pot or Stalin said the exact same thing? It's meaningless to say that you are all-knowing and that you know what's best for humanity and that it would be best if humanity were to persecute this, and this group of people and kill this, and this group of people and make sure these groups of people don't get the same rights that everyone else can enjoy. Okay, great. Now where's your proof? You can't prove it, right? Because you don't know everything, just like I don't know everything. So if you're going to appeal to authority and say, well, you don't know what God knows, I would say the exact same thing. You don't know what God knows. You don't know if God might happen to do things for the demise of humanity rather than for its benefit. So who are you to say that God's doing it for the greater good? And if such a person did come up to me and say that they were omnipotent and that they knew what was best for humanity, I would expect every normal, sane human being on the face of this earth to tell him the exact same thing that I would, that he's crazy, he's out of his mind, that anyone could do a better job of governing a country or governing the world or governing an entire universe than someone who is so obviously petulant and prideful that he can't help humanity unless we acknowledge him. That's my answer, and may the truth always be heard.